Coming back to life is in your hands. Look at things again the way you used to see them. That is what it means to come back to life. Marcus Aurelius. If getting your life back depends on seeing things differently again, then the question is no longer what hurt you. The real question is this: what part of your life is still broken because your mind keeps seeing things the wrong way, reacting the wrong way, and repeating the wrong way? That is where this really begins. Fix your mind, fix your life. Not because the world is going to become gentler, not because problems will disappear, but because an adult life is almost never destroyed only by what happens on the outside. It falls apart when the mind loses control, when it exaggerates what is happening, when it calls its habits fate, when it turns a stumble into an identity, when it gets used to thinking without order, feeling without a filter, and acting without direction. Coming back to life is in your hands. Look at things again the way you used to see them. That is what it means to come back to life. Marcus Aurelius. Source of the quote: Internet Classics Archive. That line touches the exact core of this subject because it forces you to look in the right direction. Repairing your life does not begin outside of you. It does not begin by changing your setting, your job, your partner, or your routine out of pure desperation. It begins by correcting the point from which you interpret all those things. Because a confused mind can turn a difficulty into a collapse, while a trained mind can turn even a crisis into a starting point for rebuilding. That is why, before talking about results, we need to talk about the place where results are born, the mind. That is where ruin begins. And that is also where repair begins, because a disordered mind can ruin even a good opportunity, and a trained mind can begin rebuilding a life even in the middle of exhaustion, loss, frustration, or confusion. That is the serious promise of Stoicism for an adult. Not to comfort you, to reorder you. And that is what we are going to do now. We are going to step into 10 brutal Stoic rules that are not meant to sound deep, but to correct the mind and give you back control over your own life. First rule: accept the diagnosis before you look for comfort. Most people do not change when they first realize something is wrong. They change, or try to change, much later. First, they look for relief. They look for a phrase that calms them down, a distraction that numbs them, an explanation that lets them keep functioning without touching the root of the problem. That is one of the most common mistakes in adult life. Wanting to feel better before daring to look honestly at what is broken. Wanting emotional peace without admitting the chaos you yourself have allowed, fed, or prolonged. But life is not repaired that way. An adult does not fix their situation by repeating that everything is fine when they know perfectly well it is not. They begin to fix it when they dare to tell themselves something far more uncomfortable and far more useful. This is wrong. This is hurting me. And part of this depends on me. The Stoic way of seeing begins exactly there. It does not begin with guilt, because guilt used badly only paralyzes. It does not begin with drama, because drama confuses more than it clarifies. It begins with precision, with a kind of honesty that does not seek punishment, but direction. If you are exhausted, name it. If your body has been asking for attention for months and you keep ignoring it, name it. If your finances are a mess because you have been living without standards, name it. If a relationship drains you more than it supports you, name it. If you have spent too long getting up without direction, without discipline, and without a clear reason for doing what you do, name that too. What is not named truthfully ends up ruling you from the shadows. That is why the first act of strength is not to endure more. It is not to grit your teeth. It is not to survive one more week in the same way. It is to stop lying to yourself. That is the brutality of this rule. It forces you out of the soft language you often use to cover up your decline. You are not just tired. Maybe you are badly organized. You are not just going through a hard season. Maybe you have spent months tolerating what you should already have corrected. You are not just confused. Maybe you have been avoiding a decision you know is necessary. Stoicism does not humiliate you when it shows you this. It gives your power back, because the moment you stop disguising reality, you begin to see it as something you can actually act on. Do it in a concrete way. Take a sheet of paper and divide your life into areas: mind, body, money, work, relationships, and time. In each one, write a single brutally honest sentence. 1. Nothing more. Do not explain the context. Do not soften it. Do not blame anyone. Just describe the real problem. Then ask yourself one decisive question. What part of this depends on my daily behavior? That question changes everything, because it forces you to leave the story behind and step into responsibility. And that, exactly that, is where repair begins. Second rule: stop calling fate what is really just habit. Many people look at their current life as if it were a sentence. They say, "That is just who I am. This always happens to me. I never managed to keep anything going. I was not made for this." But in many cases, what they call fate is nothing more than a sequence of habits repeated for too long. You are not only your temperament. You are not only your emotions, or your impulses, or your history. You are also your repetitions. Your present life is not shaped only by big dramatic decisions. Above all, it is built by small automatic behaviors you have repeated for months or years until they became a second nature. That is exactly what Stoicism comes to tear down. It does not treat you like a helpless victim of your personality. It does not lock you inside the idea that this is who you are forever. It treats you like someone capable of building character. And building character means understanding that what you do repeatedly ends up shaping who you are. If today you are chaotic, reactive, late, careless, dependent, or scattered, that does not mean you are doomed. It means you have spent time practicing exactly that. You have trained certain responses. You have reinforced certain mental paths. You have given in to certain behaviors so many times that they now feel like identity, when in reality they are habit. Complaining is trained. Procrastination is trained. Weakness in the face of impulse is trained too. Disorder does not appear by magic. It is built. Every time you ignore a responsibility, you strengthen a way of being. Every time you give in to tiredness without discernment, you reinforce a direction. Every time you spend without thinking, react without pausing, or delay what you know matters, you are teaching your mind who is in charge. That is why many people think they need a radical transformation, when in reality they need to retrain the repetitions that keep their disorder in place. You do not need a brand new identity overnight. You need a different practice, held firmly and consistently. That is why this rule demands patience and precision. Do not try to rebuild your whole life in 1 week, because that almost always ends in a short burst of excitement and a quick failure. Do something smarter. Identify 3 habits that support your current disorder. 1 mental, 1 physical, and 1 practical. For example, complaining as soon as the day begins, going to bed late out of pure distraction, spending money without checking what you have already lost during the week. Then replace each one with a concrete and measurable action. Breathe and stay silent during the first 10 minutes of the morning. Turn off screens 1 hour before bed. Review your transactions before making any purchase. It sounds simple, but it is not small. Repetition built you. And repetition, if you guide it with discipline, can also rescue you. That is where real change begins. Not in an emotional promise, but in a new habit sustained until it becomes character. Third rule: stop feeding desires that impoverish you from within. An adult can have a good salary, dress well, live in a comfortable place, and project an image of stability, and still be living in a deep form of slavery. not a visible slavery, but one that is far quieter and far more corrosive. The slavery of needing too much, needing to be admired, needing to be chosen, needing to buy things in order to feel valuable, needing constant signs that they are moving forward, being liked, winning, or mattering. The Stoics were relentless on this point because they understood something that is still true today. The more things you feel you need in order to be okay, the easier it becomes for the world to control you. Some people are not exhausted only because they work too much. They are exhausted because they desire too much, compare too much, expect too much, and chase too much. They want more recognition, more attention, more comfort, more immediate pleasure, more validation, more status, more signs of approval. And each of those desires, when it is not kept under discipline, begins to empty the person from the inside, because they no longer live from their center, but from constant pursuit. Their peace depends on what they get. Their mood depends on how they are treated. Their self-worth depends on what other people notice. And when that happens, they stop living freely and start living in reaction to whatever the world offers them. Stoicism corrects this distortion with a simple and hard idea. Not every desire deserves to be obeyed. Not every impulse deserves to become action. Not every longing improves your life simply because it feels intense. In fact, many of the desires dragging you around today do not come from a real need, but from an emotional lack you have not properly faced. You do not want that object because you need it, but because it promises a more valuable version of yourself. You are not seeking that reply because it truly matters, but because your insecurity cannot tolerate silence. You do not want that purchase because it improves your life, but because you need to feel something different for 10 minutes. The problem is not having desires. The problem is failing to examine them, because an unexamined desire quickly turns into dependence. That is why this rule is not asking you to live without pleasure or without ambition. It asks something smarter of you. Learn to distinguish between what truly nourishes your life and what only briefly stimulates your anxiety. For 1 week, observe with cold honesty everything you feel you need. An object, a reply, an invitation, an impulsive purchase, a message, a quick win. Every time that impulse appears, do not follow it immediately. Pause and ask yourself honestly, does this truly improve my life, or does it only calm my restlessness for a moment? That one question alone can expose an enormous amount of self-deception. Reducing useless desire does not make you poor. It makes you cleaner inside, harder to manipulate, more sober, more capable of deciding without desperation. The adult who needs less does not live worse. They live with greater authority over themselves. And that authority is worth far more than anything undisciplined desire promises. Fourth rule: your body is not decoration. It is your first responsibility. Many adults want mental clarity, emotional stability, patience, discipline, and inner strength, while completely neglecting the body that supports their daily life. They sleep badly, eat carelessly, spend hours without moving, live overstimulated, rushed, or exhausted, and then feel surprised that their mind does not respond with steadiness. But a tired mind thinks worse. An inflamed mind tolerates less. A mind supported by a mistreated body is quicker to interpret the world as a threat, gets irritated sooner, becomes more scattered, and falls more easily into impulsiveness. That is why anyone who wants to fix their life cannot treat the body as a cosmetic or secondary detail. They have to treat it as a central responsibility. Stoicism does not separate character from physical care. It does not see the body as an ornament or a luxury, but as the material base from which you face duties, losses, pressure, work, relationships, and decisions. If that base is weakened, everything else becomes less stable. This is not about chasing a perfect appearance. It is about having a functional instrument for living with dignity. Taking care of yourself is not vanity. It is maintenance. It is respect for the instrument with which you think, work, love, endure, and choose. When the body is neglected, the mind has less room to respond with calm and firmness. Then, every problem feels heavier than it should. Every conflict feels more unbearable, and every daily demand seems like too much. This is where many people fail because they make the essential things too complicated. They want perfect plans, sophisticated methods, or dramatic changes, when what matters first is putting the basics in order. The body responds better to simple consistency than to extreme bursts of effort. A more stable sleep schedule, some daily movement, even if it is not impressive, one less impulsive meal, less digital poison before bed, more water, less physiological chaos. That already changes far more than most people imagine. Not because it makes life easy, but because it restores a minimum level of inner order from which you can think more clearly. What matters here is understanding that basic care is not a reward you give yourself when everything is going well. It is a duty you maintain precisely so you do not fall apart when things go badly. You cannot wait to feel motivated before treating yourself with dignity. You cannot postpone rest, movement, or self-care until there is time, because the lack of that care is exactly what steals the energy you would need to put the rest of your life in order. The adult who abandons themselves physically becomes more vulnerable not only in health, but also in judgment, patience, and self-control. Start in a sober way. Review your nights. Review your level of movement. Review how you eat when you are anxious. Review how much digital noise you put into your head before going to sleep. Do not do it from obsession, but from responsibility. Your body does not need perfection. It needs steady respect. And when you begin to give it that, your mind stops working from a place of ruin and slowly begins to recover its firmness. Fifth rule: set boundaries before resentment speaks for you. Many adults see themselves as patient, understanding, or generous, when in reality they have spent years confusing kindness with the inability to set boundaries. They say yes to avoid making others uncomfortable. They give in to avoid conflict. They endure more than is reasonable because they are afraid of losing a relationship, a job, an opportunity, or a certain image of themselves. They swallow their discomfort once, then again, until one day they explode, turn cold, or become bitter. Then they assume the problem was other people putting too much pressure on them, when in fact part of the problem was their own lack of clarity. That is not virtue. That is elegant cowardice. It is a socially acceptable way of betraying yourself. Stoicism cuts through this self-deception with firmness. It does not promise that you can control other people's behavior. It does not promise that people will be more fair, more thoughtful, or more reasonable with you. What it does remind you is something decisive. You can define what you allow inside your space. You can decide how far your availability extends. You can make it clear what tone you will not accept, what kind of dynamic you will not continue, and what burdens you will no longer carry. A boundary is not an attack. It is not a whim. It is not a lack of love. It is clarity applied to human relationships. It is a mature way of saying, I will not keep feeding this. I will not keep arguing about this forever. This will not be allowed back into my life in the same way. The problem with failing to set boundaries in time is that the body and mind eventually send you the bill. What you do not express clearly, you store as tension. What you do not correct at the right moment becomes wear and tear. What you do not name while you can still do it calmly eventually comes out later as coldness, sarcasm, irritation, or emotional distance. That is why resentment is often the late language of a boundary that was never set. It does not come from nowhere. It comes from staying silent too long, giving in too much, tolerating too much. And when it finally speaks, it no longer speaks with clarity, but with exhaustion and poison. A Stoic adult learns to stop that chain before it turns corrosive. They understand that being firm does not mean becoming harsh. It means no longer being confusing, because many people do not cross your boundaries out of extraordinary cruelty, but because you make those boundaries blurry, movable, or non-existent. Through your own behavior, you teach them that there will always be another chance to invade your time, your energy, or your peace. That is why setting boundaries is also a form of education. It teaches the other person how they can relate to you. But above all, it teaches you that your well-being cannot always depend on other people's good intentions. Do it in a concrete way. Think of 3 situations that drain you again and again. 1 at home, 1 at work, 1 in your close relationships. Then write 1 boundary sentence for each. Brief, firm, and clean. No shouting. No endless justification. No lectures. No trying to sound perfect. Just clarity. I cannot keep solving this for you. I am not going to answer work messages at this hour. If you speak to me like that, I am ending this conversation. It may sound simple, but it is not. Saying a sentence like that forces you to stand your ground. It forces you to accept that people will not always understand, they will not always like it, and you will not always keep the comfort that silence once gave you. But that is exactly where dignity begins. An adult's peace is not begged for. It is not pleaded for. It is not negotiated through guilt. It is protected with clear boundaries before resentment starts speaking in your place. 6th rule. Organize your morning, or the world will organize your mind for you. The first hour of the day reveals far more than it seems. It reveals who is governing your attention, what has priority in your life, and from what mental state you enter the hours that follow. If you wake up and the first thing you do is hand your attention over to your phone, to messages, to news, to social media, to other people's problems, or to chaotic stimulation, then you have already started the day at a disadvantage. Before remembering who you are, what you need, or what you should uphold today, you have already allowed the world to come in and set your pace. And a mind that begins the morning by reacting will rarely spend the rest of the day governing itself firmly. It spends the day putting out fires, absorbing noise, chasing what is urgent, and losing touch with what matters. That is why the Stoic approach gives so much value to the beginning of the day, not because the morning has magical power, and not because there is some perfect routine that can turn anyone into an invincible person, but because the first stretch of the day often sets the inner direction for everything else. The adult who wakes up without intention begins the day already fragmented. They see 1 notification and receive anxiety. They see 1 email and receive pressure. They see 1 news story and receive agitation. They see what others are doing and receive comparison. And so, in less than 10 minutes, their mind is no longer at home. It is scattered, rented out, divided among stimuli they did not consciously choose. A Stoic adult needs a clean entry into the day, not to feel special or superior, but to avoid living kidnapped by urgency. Your morning does not need to be sophisticated. It needs to be deliberate. It needs to give you a few minutes of self-command before exposing you to the noise of the world. Because if you do not decide how you enter the day, someone or something else will decide for you, and it will almost never be in favor of your clarity. A disorderly beginning easily leads to a scattered day. A morning ruled by impulse usually ends in a day full of small reactions, mental fatigue, and the feeling of having been busy without ever truly being present. The solution is not complicated, but it does require discipline. Design a 30-minute starting routine. 30 sober, clean, repeatable minutes. No phone, water, washing up. A little silence or a short reading. A review of your priorities. Light, movement, or a walk. And one concrete question that gives you direction again. What must I do today in order to respect myself? That question is worth more than many productivity lists because it does not push you to do more things. It pushes you to do the right things with greater awareness. It reminds you that the day is not only about answering demands, but about not betraying yourself in the middle of them. Your morning does not have to be perfect to be useful. It has to stop being chaotic. It has to offer you a small space where your mind does not begin the day enslaved. From there, everything improves a little. You think more clearly. You respond with less haste. You tolerate pressure better. You make less impulsive decisions. And above all, you recover a quiet form of inner authority. The person who wins the morning does not control everything that will happen during the day, but they do genuinely improve their ability to govern themselves in the face of it. And for an adult who wants to repair their life, that is not a small detail. It is a decisive advantage. 7th rule. Stop treating every emotion like an order. Feeling is not a flaw. It is part of being human. What destroys many adults is not feeling sadness, fear, anger, tiredness, or anxiety. What destroys them is having learned to obey every emotion as if it were a legitimate instruction. They feel sad and isolate themselves without limit. They feel anxious and buy things to calm themselves. They feel frustrated and speak with cruelty. They feel tired and abandon important commitments. They feel wounded and go back to places, people, or habits that have already harmed them. That is how a life is ruined, not by one great visible disaster, but by a chain of small acts of obedience to the wrong impulse, not by emotion, but by emotional servitude. Stoicism does not ask you to deny what you feel or to turn yourself into a statue that cannot be moved. It asks something far more serious and far more useful. Stop kneeling before every passing inner state. An emotion can inform you, but it does not always know how to guide you. It can tell you that something is affecting you, but it does not always know what decision is wise. It can warn you about a wound, but it does not always distinguish between real danger and an exaggerated reaction. That is why an adult who wants to repair their life needs to learn to separate two things that are often confused: what they feel and what they choose to do with it. Most people live fused with whatever emotional state they are in at the moment. If today they feel insecure, they act as if they truly are incapable. If today they feel rejected, they behave as if they are worth nothing. If today they feel exhausted, they conclude that they cannot sustain anything important. That fusion is dangerous because it turns a temporary emotion into a temporary identity. And from that identity, they make decisions that leave lasting consequences. A burst of anger can break a relationship. A wave of anxiety can lead you to spend, run away, or beg. A moment of sadness can push you to abandon a discipline that you actually needed to keep. When you live like that, your life stops being directed by principles and starts being directed by chemical shifts, old wounds, and unexamined reflexes. Stoic practice offers a simple but powerful break in that pattern. Every time a strong emotion appears, do not act immediately. Interrupt automatic obedience. Ask yourself 3 questions. What exactly am I feeling? What is it pushing me to do? Will that action improve my life or make it worse? That pause is worth much more than it seems, because a strong emotion usually wants speed. It wants release, response, immediate relief. The pause takes speed away from the impulse and gives space back to awareness. And when awareness re-enters, you stop being a slave to the moment. At first, this is difficult because your system is already used to reacting without a filter. But that is exactly why this practice rebuilds inner authority. Every time you feel something strong and do not obey it blindly, you grow stronger. Every time you choose an action more dignified than the one your impulse demands, you reorganize yourself from within. This is not about refusing to feel. It is about refusing to surrender control. There are days when what you feel deserves to be heard, but not every day does it deserve to decide for you. The adult who understands that difference stops living at the mercy of their inner storm and slowly begins to truly govern themselves. 8th rule: make peace with fruitful solitude. Many adults say they want clarity, peace, and direction, yet they live running from any space where they might actually meet themselves. They need constant noise, conversation, screens, shows, music, overwork, consumption, notifications, or non-stop company. Not always because they love social life or enjoy being busy, but because silence feels uncomfortable to them. And it feels uncomfortable because, in silence, things begin to surface that they have been avoiding for far too long. Unresolved guilt, deep exhaustion, a delayed decision, an old fear, a truth they do not want to name. That is why a mind that cannot bear to be alone is almost never truly at peace. It is only distracted. Stoicism understands solitude in a very different way from the modern view that quickly links it with lack or sadness. Solitude, when used well, does not empty you. It reveals you. It places you in front of yourself, without the makeup of entertainment, without the noise of your surroundings, and without the excuse that you do not have time to listen to what is happening inside. There, you see more clearly what hurts you, what irritates you, what you truly want, what you are ashamed of, what you are tolerating, and what you are avoiding. Without that encounter, you keep living outwardly, reacting to whatever happens, adjusting yourself to other people's pace, filling your day so you do not have to feel what lies underneath. And a life like that may look active, but inside it is still confused. Many adults fear solitude because they confuse it with abandonment. But being alone is not the same as being lost. In fact, some people are surrounded by others and still live deeply disconnected from themselves, while others can recover more truth in one quiet moment than in entire weeks of conversation. Fruitful solitude is not about shutting yourself away to punish yourself or pulling back from the world out of superiority. It is about giving yourself a space where noise can no longer keep covering what is unfinished. It is about creating an inner place where your thoughts stop running after the next stimulus and can finally begin to settle with honesty. That is why this rule does not ask you to isolate yourself from the world, but to reconcile yourself with moments of bare presence. Practice 20 minutes of solitude without entertainment every day. No phone, no shows, no music, no conversation. Just walk, sit, or write. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. Just be there with yourself, without distraction. At first it feels uncomfortable, and that is exactly why it works. Because it shows you how dependent you have become on noise. It shows you how hard it is for you to simply be with yourself. And that information alone is valuable. With time, that solitude stops feeling like emptiness and starts feeling like a space of cleansing. Your mind slows down. Your emotions become easier to read. Your problems stop feeling like one confused mass and begin to separate into parts you can understand. You discover what needs action and what needs acceptance. You discover which pain needs to be faced and which thought simply needed to stop being fed. An adult mind needs these spaces because without them, it ends up kidnapped by the outside world. And a mind kidnapped by noise never reaches depth, never reaches sobriety, and almost never reaches real direction. Making peace with fruitful solitude is, in the end, a way of coming home to yourself. 9th rule: review your day like a fair judge, not like an enemy. Many adults end the day in one of two ways. Either they excuse everything too easily and learn nothing, or they condemn themselves so harshly that they end up exhausted, guilty, and stuck. Some turn their failures into something normal and repeatable. Others turn every mistake into proof that they are not good enough. Neither path helps repair a life. The first destroys inner standards. The second destroys moral energy. Stoicism offers a third path, one that is far more useful and far more mature. Review yourself without theater, without soft indulgence, without useless cruelty, with truth, with sobriety, and with the intention to improve. The reason for this practice is simple. What you do not review, you repeat, and what you repeat without noticing eventually shapes your character. A bad habit does not always take hold because it is powerful, but because it goes too many days without being confronted. A clumsy reaction becomes a habit when no one examines it. A small act of cowardice becomes a stable trait when you let it move freely through your life without correction. That is why the adult who does not review their days lives on autopilot. They think they are moving forward just because they are busy, when in reality they may have spent weeks or months stumbling over the same mistakes, exhausting themselves with the same decisions, damaging relationships in the same way, or once again neglecting what they know matters. But reviewing yourself is not the same as punishing yourself. It is not lying down every night to list everything bad about yourself. It is not turning yourself into your own executioner. That too is a form of vanity, because it keeps your attention obsessively fixed on yourself without producing real improvement. The fair judge that Stoicism proposes does not humiliate or flatter. It observes, it distinguishes, it corrects. It says plainly, "Here I failed, here I responded well, here I was weak, here I stood firm, here I need to correct myself tomorrow." Nothing more. No melodrama, no wounded identity, no strange pleasure in mistreating yourself, which some people confuse with honesty. True honesty does not crush you, it gives you direction. This practice has a deep effect because it turns each day into moral training. You stop seeing the day as something that simply happened to you and begin to see it as ground where you were present or absent, dignified or impulsive, clear-minded or careless. You regain judgment over your own conduct. And that repeated judgment makes you less naive in the face of your own self-deception. You begin to notice what triggers you, what weakens you, at what hours you fall most easily, with which people you betray yourself more quickly, what kind of tiredness makes you more foolish, and which decisions you usually postpone. In other words, you begin to know yourself in a useful way, not a decorative one. Do it every night before sleep. You do not need to write pages or turn it into a complicated ritual. Answer 3 questions in writing. What did I do well today? Where did I betray myself? What will I correct tomorrow in a specific way? The first keeps you from seeing only darkness and forgetting your progress. The second keeps you from hiding from your failures. The third turns reflection into action and keeps it from becoming empty thought. What matters is that you write the truth, not pretty phrases. Because the value of this practice is not that it sounds deep, but that it makes you less and less blind to your own traps. And when that happens, the day stops being consumed on autopilot and finally begins to work in your favor. 10th rule: live to be worthy, not to be admired. Many adults ruin their lives in a socially applauded way. They do not destroy themselves by doing something scandalous, but by living too focused on their image. They want to seem centered, seem successful, seem strong, seem mature, seem interesting, seem above the chaos that still rules them inside. They take more care of what they project than of what they truly are. And that trade is extremely costly because image can be polished for a while, but character always ends up demanding payment. You can maintain an appearance of order while still being impulsive inside. You can seem confident while being deeply dependent on approval. You can seem wise while privately repeating habits that make you smaller. That is where a divided life begins. The life of someone who works harder on being seen a certain way than on truly becoming someone solid. Stoicism tears that need out by the root. It reminds you that other people's admiration is unstable, fickle, and deeply insecure as a foundation for identity. Today, someone praises you. Tomorrow, they ignore you. Today, you fit in. Tomorrow, you disappoint. Today, you project strength. Tomorrow, you do not respond the way they expected. If you build your center on that kind of gaze, you will live hungry. You will always need another sign, another recognition, another confirmation that you are still valuable. And from that hunger, terrible decisions are made. Jobs are accepted for status, not for integrity. Relationships are maintained for appearance, not for truth. Money is spent to impress. Words are used to sound important. Actions are taken to win approval. Little by little, you stop living from within and start living before a real or imaginary audience. So the right question is not how people see you. The right question is far more demanding. Are you becoming a person worthy of respect, even when no one applauds you? That difference changes everything. It makes you less theatrical and more clean inside, less anxious to be liked and more committed to substance, less dependent on other people's reactions and more responsible for your own conduct. Because dignity does not depend on the noise you make, but on the quality of what you keep standing in silence. It depends on whether you keep your word, on whether you do what is right when no one is watching, on whether you know how to give up what degrades you even if it benefits you on the outside, on whether you have the strength to disappoint other people's expectations when those expectations pull you away from yourself. Living this way does not mean despising everyone's opinion or locking yourself inside lonely arrogance. It means not handing your center over to that opinion. It means your final standard is not applause, but integrity. That is why, before an important decision, it helps to ask a different question. Not what will make me look better, not what will make others approve of me, not what will keep my image untouched. The useful question is this: what will make me respect myself more tomorrow? That one question brings order to relationships, money, habits, work, and the use of time. It helps you cut off what feeds the facade and strengthen what builds substance. The adult who lives to be worthy becomes more stable than the one who lives to impress, because they no longer depend on a changing audience to know who they are. And when someone stops begging for admiration, they can finally begin to build real character. Fixing your mind does not mean becoming cold, perfect, or invulnerable. It does not mean stopping yourself from feeling, never falling, or turning into a machine of flawless discipline. It means something much more human and much more serious. It means stopping the habit of living broken on the inside while trying to look normal on the outside. It means stopping calling fate what you have simply tolerated. It means putting order where there was impulse, judgment where there was noise, boundaries where there was exhaustion, discipline where there was neglect, and truth where there were excuses. At its core, fixing your mind means recovering self-command before continuing to demand that life change in your favor. That is what these 10 rules are trying to remind you of. Chaos does not always enter your life as a visible tragedy. Sometimes it enters as habit, as permissiveness, as poorly trained desire, as a lack of boundaries, as mornings surrendered to noise, as emotions obeyed without examination, as fear of silence, as days that end without review, as an identity too dependent on other people's gaze. And for that very reason, repair also rarely begins with a dramatic turn. It begins in a more sober way. It begins when you see one of those cracks and decide not to keep feeding it. It begins when you cut off a behavior before it becomes character. It begins when you stop waiting for an ideal version of yourself and work with the one that exists today, but with more honesty, and more firmness. Your life does not change just because you understand an idea. It changes when that idea enters your daily behavior and becomes visible in small things. When you sleep with more respect, when you speak with more clarity, when you spend with more judgment, when you tolerate less mediocrity in yourself, when you stop obeying everything you feel, when you review your day truthfully, when you do in silence what strengthens your dignity even if no one celebrates it. That is where philosophy stops being decoration and becomes structure. That is where it stops being a speech about life and starts becoming a way of living it. You do not need to rebuild everything today. You also do not need to wait until you feel completely ready. You need to begin with one rule and actually live it. Just one. Choose it, hold to it, repeat it, and protect it until it stops feeling like borrowed effort and starts becoming part of your character. That is how serious change begins. That is how real repair begins. Not all at once, but through sober actions that gradually return inner authority to you. Fix your mind, and your life, little by little, will stop feeling like a chaotic accident and start feeling like a deliberate work, built with awareness, corrected with firmness, and sustained by someone who finally decided to govern themselves.